I'm Catherine McLean, founder and CEO of Dillon Green. And today I have with me a couple of senior ladies from Generate Capital. Jessie Robbins is the Vice President of Structured Finance and Tax Equity. She's based in the DC area. Welcome, Jessie.
Thanks for having me.
And Marisa Sweeney is in San Francisco, and she is the director of the investment team there. Welcome.
Hey, Catherine. Thanks so much for having us.
No, I'm so excited. This conversation all got started, or this interview got arranged because Jessie and I were at an event together in DC, and we were talking about how passionate she is about project finance. And so I was saying, well, doesn't Marisa do like more kind of M&A work? And so it'd be really interesting to kind of like talk about the juxtaposition of the different roles that you guys have, because I think there are a lot of younger candidates who are getting into the industry who like aren't sure what direction they want to go. So I'm looking forward to like having that debate about what's the perfect career opportunity for them. So first, I want to say congrats, Marisa, for recently being recognized on the Forbes 30 Under 30 in Energy list. Well deserved.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's awesome. It's a really big honor, and I was honestly just psyched to even be in the running. So it's great.
Yeah. So I want you all to start by telling me a little bit about your roles at Generate. Do you want to start, Marisa?
Sure, I'm happy to. Just to give some background, I joined Generate in 2016 when we were a relatively small team at the time. So we were about 18 people, less than 10 on the investment team. And we've since scaled up to being over 150 people across 4 offices as of like January this year. So I've been with the team from the beginning. And I started as an associate on the investment team, and I've since been promoted up through being a director on the investment team, which, as you might guess from like general banking and private equity structuring, it kind of is your typical triangular deal structure where you have like more senior folks running deal processes and negotiations on like as the further you move up, and more junior people like associates running down diligence requests, writing IMs, et cetera. So I've kind of grown up through Generate in that sense. Since being hired at Generate, I've actually had the opportunity to work on a number of different markets and technologies within sustainable infrastructure. So when I initially started, I was more focused on our solar projects, working in tax equity, like Jessie specializes in. We're so grateful to have a tax equity specialist now. It's absolutely phenomenal, a total luxury compared to when we first started. And these days, I'm more focused on the waste sector, working on investments within the circular economy and also renewable natural gas. That's an area that I've kind of was really piqued my interest because I saw it as being kind of the next frontier in terms of sustainable infrastructure as we think about decarbonization and the landscape for what will be required in order to get to like net zero. So that's a little bit about me. Yeah.
Cool. Jessie?
Yeah, so I joined Generate just over a year ago, just past my 1-year mark, and it's flown by. And I came on board to the capital markets team to spearhead our tax equity efforts. So while Marisa sits on the investment team, I'm on the capital markets side, and our team is responsible for resourcing the company for all of its capital needs, from our corporate raises, both debt and equity, to project finance, where I mainly specialize, tax equity and some project finance debt as well. So I've gravitated towards that end of the spectrum. For tax equity, that primarily means solar and other energy assets, solar plus storage, fuel cells. God forbid if we get a standalone storage credit one of these days, really whatever is going to be incentivized at the federal level is probably incentivized with tax benefits, and that requires bringing in equity partners and kind of doing some complicated dances around how you set up that capital stack. So I love those asset classes. My background is in solar, but I've had a blast working on some newer verticals for me that Generate is deeply steeped in. So I love talking to Marisa about the waste to value verticals and working with our team that's looking at EV charging infrastructure, the mobility thesis, and many other areas that probably have some opportunity to bring additional benefits with tax structuring investments.
Great. Thank you for that. So tell me a little bit about the projects or the work that you're most proud of at your time at Generate so far. And what are you most excited about working on this year? Do you want to just keep the order? Right?
Yes, you have a long list. I have only 1 year to look back on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll take some highlights. There's one project which actually was the first project I was even staffed on when I started at the firm. And we basically completed the acquisition of a development pipeline of projects in New York City that were based on city schools. And this was a project that was certainly near and dear to my heart. And I don't know how much y'all buy into like fate and things being like fated, but I remember it was my first day at Generate. I got to the desk and they were like, hey, we're looking at this portfolio of projects in New York City. You just moved to San Francisco from there. Take a look and let us know what you think. And for me, I was like, oh, wow, this is awesome. I was just working on distributed solar in New York City, pricing some deals in New York City. So I actually had an opportunity to know what I was doing on like the first day of working, which almost never happens. So I felt like that was very lucky. And I pulled up the project list and I sorted by like size of project. The biggest project on the list was a high school that my parents taught at together for over 15 years. They're both New York City school teachers. And there it was, like Beach Channel High School at the top of the list. And I was like, wow, this is a good sign. I don't know what the sign means. I don't know what to read into it, but this is a great sign. So that was a power purchase agreement that we entered into with the city of New York, and then went to build several sites across the city on public schools. So that is certainly like a project that I saw through like kind of start to finish. It's still in construction, so we're still building some of the sites, but that was a project that I was like, wow, like this is kind of meant to be. And then bringing it kind of more recently, I'm super excited about all that we're doing within the waste space. Our team just acquired a couple of like big deals were announced by our team. We made a major investment in AMP Americas, which is a renewable natural gas company that's based in Chicago. We also made a material investment in Atlas Organics, which is a composting company. And I'm also excited. I cover the area of kind of like advanced recycling and other sorts of like plastics, reformation, et cetera. And just kind of broadly, like that's an area that I'm super excited and passionate about, because I think we'll have to very quickly start dealing with like the circular impacts of our supply chains, et cetera. So that's what I'm working on. And that's kind of what I'm excited about.
I think that stuff is super exciting. I mean, and you don't hear as much about it as you do like some of the other technologies. I think that's going to be a massive growth area for jobs.
There's so much more out there than just energy. It's so exciting to work alongside folks that are focused on that. For me, I'm so proud of the team over the past year and really pre that for the whole COVID period of how volatile and crazy the world has been. And just the team shown amazing resilience and flexibility to just adapt to these constantly changing project timelines and capital markets conditions and tax equity is available and then it's not. And then, we're handling project, deployment targets and just the team's risen to meet all these challenges. And I've really enjoyed working with the investment team. Two investments that I'd highlight is our New York Community Solar platform. So different New York projects. These are in the VEDR and NEM programs in New York State. And just that has grown to be this immense, machine, I guess, of all these project sites across the state. And we've really gotten it down to just this well-oiled machine that's deploying and financing assets as they roll off the pipeline. And then another area is our fuel cell activity, which I can't speak about too openly. I don't think we've made many public announcements about that, but that's been a big focus for me this year and very proud of the work there.
Cool. So I want to talk about what we discussed right in the beginning on why we originally decided to do this interview, which is project finance versus M&A. So I'm a student, I'm just joining the industry. I'm trying to figure out like what I want to focus on. Marisa, why do I want to focus on M&A?
It's so funny. I would say, to reframe a little bit, I would just be excited if you're a student who knows that you want to work on sustainable financing, whatever that means. And I find especially, one of my strong areas of interest outside of my day job is just kind of encouraging the pipeline of women and people of color to just even get into the space to begin with. So I would kind of just start with are you interested in finance? Have you thought about clean energy, sustainable infrastructure, decarbonization finance? And then from there, we can talk about project finance and M&A.
All right.
From an M&A, like when people say M&A, that can kind of mean a bunch of different things. In a sense, aspects of project finance do have like M&A-like characteristics. You might not be merging companies and having to do like the analysis around integration and synergies and potential structures around valuation. Like that approach is like a different approach. But the process of buying and selling things in a sense, at a company like Generate, where we're an operator, and when we acquire projects, we're bringing them onto our balance sheet. Even if it's a ring-fenced SPV that mostly contains a community solar farm in upstate New York, you're still having to think through what are the business operational impacts of taking on that portfolio. So my kind of initial thought, and I don't mean for this to be a cop-out, particularly for more junior folks, don't get too fussed up whether or not you got a project finance role or an M&A role if you have under, call it 5 years of experience, because the important part is that you found subject matter that you're interested in. And the fundamental skills that you're getting from that work, whether it's getting into the details of documentation, understanding just negotiating dynamics from a psychological standpoint, understanding financial modeling, et cetera, whether you're modeling companies versus projects, at the end of the day, it's all cash flows. So I don't think, especially at the junior level, folks shouldn't get like too fussed up about whether or not they're doing like, I think that sometimes there's like a thought like, oh, I want to do sexy M&A work or sexy corporate financing work. And I'm kind of like, well, if you've picked like a strong subject matter area that you're genuinely keenly interested in and are going to be able to track with like passion, excitement, and engagement, that's going to like be what drives your career, not whether or not like you hit the jackpot on your like associate recruiting coming out of banking and like landed a spot on a buyout team for like energy. You know, like I think people sometimes, especially I find like the most high achieving junior people get really fussed up on the distinction. Whereas I think there's merits to both so long as you have an open mind to leverage the skill set.
And frankly, you do need both. And what I try to share is whatever role you think you might want, you can find it in energy, whether we're parsing different versions of finance or whether someone's interested in an HR role or market, like you can find it in energy and sustainable infrastructure. So that's, hugely encouraging. Just find what you like to do and go find a way to apply that skill in the industry. When it comes to M&A and versus project finance, you need both. You have to understand the assets. You'll never regret getting that experience to really get your hands dirty, go on that site visit, everything's going swimmingly. And then you get a call that like, a bird flew into your transformer and like blew the fuse before you're going to commission. Like these things happen, you really get an appreciation for the operations of these assets. Asset management is a wonderful place to really get a lot of that experience. And then similarly, if you are, building a career as an investor in energy technologies, you also can't ignore the impacts of debt and tax equity and how those play into the capital stack and your valuations. So you kind of need to do both anyway. And a lot of folks end up kind of bridging that in different ways across their career. And if you're at a good company, and especially in this industry, you're not going to get pigeonholed. Things are growing too quickly and moving too quickly for you to get pigeonholed.
Yep. But I want to hear from you what it is about what you do.
Not letting us off the hook.
You love, because you were so passionate about it, Jessie. Like when we met, I don't know, maybe it's because you have a glass of wine. I don't know, but you were so passionate about it. And I love people that are passionate about what they do. So what is it about what you do that you love?
Yeah, for sure. I can share this, and Marisa, you can push back. So I know you'll hold me. You'll keep me accountable. So I've done both. I've done C&I project acquisitions, which in like 2012, and that was the Wild West. And I've done project finance. And I've gravitated towards structured finance. For me, the repeat relationships and the ability to form those partnerships with banks, investors, other institutions that you can work with year over year, establish a lot of trust, and then innovate and continue to build on that to do cooler and better things year over year. I think that's fascinating. Really enjoy that aspect of my role, which isn't to say you can't do that in the M&A space, but that's just different kind of relationships there. Okay. And the second piece that I really appreciate. I think that for young people, especially thinking about what role they want in the industry, they should be honest with themselves about their ability to tolerate risk and their risk tolerance in terms of, you go in and you work on something day in, day out. Are you okay if that falls apart? Or are you okay with a high or a low? And I don't have the risk tolerance that folks who are out there bidding on dozens of deals, and I like a little bit more consistency in my work, and that goes back to the relationships as well. So I enjoy building those. And again, you do have to do it on the project side too. It's maybe just a little bit more in one direction versus another on the risk spectrum.
Okay. Anything you want to say, Marisa?
Yeah. And I really also just think it depends on like what level of your career in. And I can't stress enough that like, I don't think it matters a ton so long as you're under 5 years experience, because what's important is that you found your way to the sector that you enjoy, and you can worry about strategic positioning if you become more interested in either direction. So say that you're working at a big bank, working on large like debt transactions for renewable energy projects. That is in no way going to be like bad experience. Now, I could see you like being in that seat and thinking to myself, like, wow, like I'm really curious what the sponsor side looks like for these types of transaction. And I'd like to get that exposure, et cetera. But I think like the skills that you're getting in an analyst or an associate role, it's pretty similar, like across the different roles. If whether you're in a capital markets seat like Jessie or an investor sponsor seat like me, like at those certain analyst associate levels, it's relatively similar. And I think that that's like kind of like, to me, like the important part is that like you're interested, engaged, and in mastering those like detail orientation and technical skills at that level. Like that's what people should focus on, not so much the directions. I will say though, to argue, and I really don't want to bash it, because people are going to like throw up like, I don't know, the equivalent of like rotten eggs on LinkedIn comments, but like,
It's a controversial position.
Totally. I think that, at least in my experience, compared with like a debt financing or goodness forbid a tax equity financing, the acquisition work is like pretty exciting. And to Jessie's point, there is like an element of risk. There is sometimes like an element of like, you're building the plane as you're flying it. You're not necessarily sure what's going to happen. Valuation is a negotiation. Everything's up for negotiation until it's pinned down. And yeah, absolutely. It can totally fall apart on you. Whereas if you're sitting in like a debt financing seat and the project is one day away from COD, and barring like failing the witness test, like, this thing is going, when you get that term sheet in hand to finance the debt on that project for the back leverage facility, you can have that certainty of close and execution. Whereas, yeah, absolutely. Some M&A work is a bit more pie in the sky. You can burn months of your life on something that may not happen. But the point is that you kind of have to go through the exercise of trying, and it's getting the repetitions around doing that make you better at it, watching what's happening in the market, et cetera. So I think that there's definitely, again, I don't want to like to call any finance role creative is like, reaching a little bit compared to actual creative professions. But I would say it lends itself to kind of more creative structuring as opposed to like certain standard types of, call it tax equity structures or back leverage structures, or the kind of the more like regular way financings that you see in project finance.
It is funny that you actually mentioned the word creative, because I was taking a spec the other day from managing director of origination, and he used that exact word. He said the same thing. He's like, I know that sounds weird. He's like, I just want someone that's like creative around putting the deal together. And I think it is a good word. I think it does take some creativity to get these deals done and thinking outside the box.
Especially when you're working on, I don't want to say new technologies, because the technologies themselves are new, but the business models might be new, or the application might be new. And tax equity gets the worst rap for this, and often it's well-deserved. But if it's not widely done, no one often is interested in doing it. And that's where you do have to bring in that creativity to how do you explain, how do you pitch, how do you communicate, how do you pull on those relationships to really help folks understand and come along with you that this is a good investment. But the fact, Marisa, that you used the word exciting to describe the space, like that's how you're in the right role, right? And I to underscore Marissa's earlier point, one is not better than the other. At an early stage in your career, frankly, you should probably try to get exposure to both and just
Totally.
gravitate, like find what you actually enjoy and are good at. And that'll do well.
The only thing I would build upon that point, Jessie, is just to say, if you take a market, to your point about business models, I think that's actually a really excellent point. If you look at the community solar market in, call it 2015, it barely existed. Like Colorado had a program and a lot of other states were talking about having programs. And I remember doing like a market mapping. One of my first like tasks to do when I worked at Onyx Renewable Partners was like to create a market mapping for the community solar opportunity. And really, when you get into the weeds of those projects and those specific programs, each like jurisdiction, whether it's Minnesota or New York, et cetera, like has their own rules and functions a bit differently. And then if you transfer that over from a financing perspective, there's kind of this process of educating the financial markets on, well, how do we think about community solar back leverage debt provider compared to a power purchase agreement with a commercial and industrial off-taker. And I think that that's actually the beauty of Generate, is that we were founded around this idea of creating what Jigger still calls the bridge to bankability, which is like, how do you allow for innovation within a space based upon proven technology and move it forward even when like you're having slightly different business models that are emerging. So I think that's actually like an interesting example of like, okay, this is not any like technically any different from any other solar project. This is just a new business model. And from an underwriting perspective, whether you're the sponsor, the tax equity provider, or the back leverage provider, you're gonna have to get comfortable with a new set of risks and kind of recontemplate your underwriting. And that's the part of work, that's the work at Generate that I found exciting, was really that kind of pushing the market. And that's not specific to the financing type. We were still doing project finance, but what we were doing was almost like the earlier stage market building. And that's the aspects of my career that I found like kind of the most exciting, regardless of structure.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into the clean energy, Marisa?
Yeah, totally. I, in college, was very unsure about what I wanted to do, but I've always had this strong desire to like preserve maximum optionality until I have more information. So I went after college, I went to SUNY Binghamton, and I started, and I thought that I was going to major in like pre-law, whatever that meant, and become a lawyer because I knew what lawyers did. And I was pretty good at like English and critical reading and all those things. I was like, great, I'll be competent at this. And I had like, the bar was not, I won't say low, but like, I just had a very general idea of what I thought it meant to be successful. And that's what I wanted to do. It turned out that Binghamton had a pretty phenomenal undergraduate business program, and I had a lot of AP credits. So I added on a business degree. In parallel, one of my kind of extracurricular interests had always been environmental activism and work. Like I was the president of Blue Marble, which was my high school's environmental club, but it wasn't like clear to me how that translated to a job. So I always kind of had to like put it to the side in my mind of like, okay, like going to have to figure out how to weave that in. When I was doing I ultimately ended up being a like integrated philosophy major. I was doing a lot more applied philosophy, really focused on environmental ethics, but also like tracking along and doing my investment banking recruiting. And again, in my head, I'm like, again, walk the path, preserve optionality, figure out what you want to do.
Yeah.
My first job, I worked in the risk group at Goldman Sachs doing credit risk advisory and structuring. So I'm basically telling investment bankers no, which was like a really like, frankly, like grueling job from a finance perspective. Like I was just like, wow, these people are crazy. And you have to work really hard. That kind of taught me that if I'm going to be in this career for the long haul, I need to figure out a subsector that I actually care about. Otherwise, like I'm probably going to lose it, have a mental breakdown in 5 years and like have to move to Fiji or something to recover. And it was within that year of working, I connected with a friend who was one of the early employees at Onyx Renewable Partners doing solar project development, which at the time, like I didn't know what the word tax equity even meant. Like to think that there was even a time in my life where I didn't know what that word meant. I remember like we were prepping for the interview and he was like, so do you know what tax equity is? And I kind of looked at him and was like, no. And then I just was like furiously Googling to prepare for this interview. And I really look at that as like the transformational moment for me. Like, wow, like this was an option to interview for this job, of which I kind of knew like I had to really study up on to be credible, but I knew that renewable energy, particularly given my environmental interests, was where I wanted to go and something I could like dig into and really care about. So I kind of took that leap and haven't looked back since, like thematically speaking. It's funny, I actually caught up with the former president and then CEO of that company. And I actually thanked her and was just like, hey, I just want to say, like, looking back 6.5, 7 years ago, thank you for taking a chance on me, because I love this stuff. And like, it could have easily not happened. Like I could have easily not had this break, weaved around, did some random stuff. And I'm just so grateful that I had that kind of like pivot point.
Yep.
Jessie? Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I have a slightly different path, but equal feelings of just immense gratitude to have like tripped into this space and kind of found your calling. And then also the sense of being in school, having these passions and having no idea what careers are even available. And I hope, I get the sense it is not like that today. If you want to do renewables and you're on any sort of recruitment track for consulting or iBanking or whatever, you're headed towards, that exists now, which is great. But I don't have a formal background in business. I came into the renewable sector through the environmental science door. And I ended up working for a startup here in DC after graduation that was doing environmental credit trading, so SREC trading, and had just started doing C&I project acquisitions, totally building the plane as we were flying it. But because of that, had a ton of opportunity to get experience and learn and grow. We started a tax equity syndication platform that eventually grew into a sponsor fund, management team. So through that, the growth of that small company was able to have exposure to all of these different aspects of the industry and really gravitate towards project finance. But I look back and think, I could have just as easily taken a different turn. So it's a little, I feel very grateful to have ended up here.
I think this is what, I speak on a lot of career events and things, and there's a lot of people who feel like you should have a plan, like a career plan. And I do somewhat agree with that. But I also think like life's what happens when you're making plans for it. And I think you need to just be a little open-minded to see kind of, where the opportunities may arise, because you never know.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. Plans are helpful because they keep you moving forward, not because you actually end up where where you thought you would be in your plan.
Right.
It just gives you something to focus on, gives you a goal. But it's evolved for me at least, and evolved immensely. And the other thing I think that's helpful is to just remember that things don't happen quickly, that you may have years where you feel like, wow, I didn't see the progress I wanted. I didn't get the promotion. I didn't get, and it's important to, I don't know. I think a lot of folks nowadays and early in their career feel they should be moving around every 2 years, every 2 to 3 years. And that is a way to get experience, but working, especially on the development or sponsor side, like it'll take longer than that to get a project done. So actually sticking around, like I've learned so much just by sticking with the team, sticking with the company.
Agreed. But as a recruiter, there's either.
Check my audience. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So next question is advice or career success factors. So what would you say are the strongest contributing factors to your career success, whether it be mentorship or having an internal advocate, industry groups such as RISE, WCS? And do you have any advice for women looking to follow in your footsteps? Marisa?
Yeah, that's a big question. My initial thought is, as far as advice, like there's 1,000 cliche things to say. And I think a lot of them are cliche because they're true and they're accurate. Like you need to work hard, you need to believe in yourself. And I will say, and I don't mean to be like cheesy with this soapbox, but particularly for women, I often find, and increasingly as I move through my career, I'm in the mentoring seat as opposed to like the mentee seat.
Right.
I find myself encouraging women to be more aggressive. I find myself encouraging women to go for the thing that they may not be qualified for, which again, what their perception of what they're qualified for is often like radically different from what the actual market standard is that exists in reality. Also, and my younger sister, just for reference, is 6 years younger than me in her first couple of years of working. And one of the things through our chats that we've been having, I'm often encouraging her to just really build up her own personal resilience around her self-esteem, her belief in her capabilities, and her self-championing for her own abilities, because frankly, like, no, it's no one else's job to do that for you. And it is something that you will continue to work on for like your entire career and really your life. So it's something that you need to get used to doing early on, because taking that personal advocacy position is something that is like evergreen regardless of your role. And it doesn't get easier if you don't get in the habit of doing. So that's a big one that I've been really just pushing out to my network, or when I'm having a chat with a friend and she's telling me how she wants to go for this role that's a principal level at an investment firm, but she's not sure if she's ready. My first question is always like, well, why don't you think you're ready today? And two, what does the 6-month, 1-year plan look like to actually get you ready? Because yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe you have a very accurate self picture and there are gaps that don't make you a good fit. That's fine. But let's talk about how we could like leverage one another's networks and support to actually make a plan to get you there, because that's kind of the activation and support that folks need. So soapbox down. Jessie, over to you.
Wholeheartedly agree. It's no one else's job to advocate for you. And that is maybe something that, if we're being honest with ourselves, a lot of us have to do a lot of work on to learn how to do that. No one's going to do that for you. And it is essential. It's not enough to just think, I'm going to work with great people. They're going to be perfect managers and I'll get where I need to go. You really have to learn what you want and how to advocate for yourself in a way that feels authentic to you. I'm not saying that everyone's going to become the always be closing character from that movie. It has to be authentic, but you also have to learn how to do that. I think the only one thing you asked about, Catherine, is it important to find mentors or champions within organizations? And I think it is, but that's another sort of generic, like it's something that you hear a lot because it's true. I'll try to make it a little bit more specific. I would encourage folks, anyone really, to find people in your organization or in your industry who you can trust to give you honest feedback, not just advice, but actually people who see you in your day-to-day environment, people who see how you work and are willing to tell you, like, to remove the blind spots and give you some honest feedback. So for instance, I'm thinking of one manager in particular who's wonderful, transformative manager at this point in my career, who sat me down and told me at one point, you're not doing your job if you're not pissing someone off once a month. Like, let's set a KPI for that once a month. And that was like perfect, actionable, measurable. And it helped me at that point, understand that if you're not pushing, such that folks are annoyed, then you're probably not being very effective. So whatever that is for you, to get that feedback, there are a lot of great managers and nice people who just may not give you that hard feedback. And without it, it's that much harder to learn and to grow.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Self-advocacy, that just really, really resonates with me. The pissing people off part, I've been in sales my whole career, so I've definitely had managers tell me that before. And I think it's true, obviously, to an extent, but I just said, what's
use
that?
It wisely, judiciously. Yeah. Use it wisely.
But that self-advocacy just really, really resonates with me, because I think sometimes as women, we're looking for this like knight in shining armor, and not necessarily like a guy, but just anyone that is willing to.
Or Catherine, you want to get it right. You want to like do the thing. Like, the reason I was so fussed up when I was in undergrad was like, I wanted to be successful. Like, I wanted to like get the A, check the box, do the thing. Yeah. And really it's like, once you graduate, or even before that, like the road is open, and and you have to carve your own path and be pushing yourself forward, because people don't exist to do that for you. People will support you if you ask them and have a plan, but like, you are the master of the plan. So no, it really is so true. I mean, instead of, and I think I was guilty of it, you're waiting for people to tell you how great you are, rather than actually like being thoughtful in how you communicate how great you are. But I think it goes back to a confidence issue, that a lot of women, and I'm sure men have, when they are younger and graduating, or even when they're older. We obviously have imposter syndrome, and like, it just never ends. Totally. So. And it layers on. And I will say, and Jessie, I love that you called out, because that would be my second piece of advice, but like actively like soliciting hard feedback and critical feedback. you don't need to be self-flagellating about it. And I'm certainly not, when I say self-advocacy, I am not endorsing like a girl boss mentality where like, I can do no wrong and like, whatever, like, no, like that's toxic. You absolutely can do wrong. And we all have like an ability to improve. But what I mean is like identifying your concerns, not obsessing over them and not like overblowing them as like reasons why you can't like proceed and continue to do well, right? It's like the appropriate analysis of where you're at and how to move it forward. And I'll say the same. The best feedback I've gotten generally tends to be critical, which is great because it makes me better and it makes me to be more effective, and others are able to see things in you that you can't always see, both on the positive side and the negative side. So it's always good to have the person who will give it to you straight, and a person who can give it to you straight in a kind way that you respect, and like the respect is mutual.
I noticed that shortly after Generate raised $2 billion from investors a few months ago, Fortune magazine named Generate as one of the 2021 best small and medium workplaces, which is based on employee surveys. I also noticed that the majority of Generate's board of directors is comprised of women and people of color. How important do you think diversity and inclusion are for the success of clean energy companies?
I'm happy to take a first stab. And I appreciate you kind of giving Generate the shout out on our board composition, on our employee engagement. Like that is all that frankly, like kind of stems from the culture of Generate and is what we're really working hard to build on every day. And I say that like, we're not perfect, but we're going to continue advancing on that because it's an area that we want to lead on and an area where we aspire to be one of the best companies on. And recently we actually converted to a public benefit corporation, which is a big deal. Like not many companies doing that, and certainly not many financial sponsors and kind of traditional infrastructure operators doing that. So I'm super proud of the work that we do at Generate. And I think I can, in the same breath, say there's always more to do. And I think part of the reason why diversity, equity, and inclusion is so important within clean energy and the broader sustainability landscape is just the fact that like we're talking about a multi-layered stakeholder problem around climate change. Like women and people of color are like the most impacted by the negative impacts, which are most of them, of climate change. And we're going to have to radically reform the way that we run most of the businesses across the globe over the next 20 or 30 years. And that's going to require insight and perspective from tons and tons of different people. So it's almost like I see it as not just like required and a nice to have, and we should do this as a fluffy corporate KPI, but like, no, like we must. We're talking about transforming infrastructure, transforming systems, making it really a paradigm shift in how we conduct business. And you have to have a diversity of perspectives. Otherwise, you're likely to replicate the similar like issues and systems that like got us into where we are today. So I'm super passionate about it. And I think that, I mean, I don't have to get into all of like the consulting firm level data that talks about diverse teams and the benefits and the business case, et cetera. Like, I think that's all been sufficiently hashed out. But I think the problem is, frankly, like particularly magnified within an area like clean energy, where you're building infrastructure that touches communities and gives power to people, quite literally.
Can you just explain, so for people who might not be aware, what a public benefit corporation is?
Yeah, I think, and we'll give you notes on this so you can get like the direct filing so that I don't completely like, it's slightly different from a B Corp, which is what people are pretty familiar with. Like, for example, I think Ben & Jerry's is a B Corp. It's not a B Corp, which is, from my understanding, is kind of a association of like aspirational things that companies kind of commit to doing almost in like a pledge infrastructure. A public benefit corporation is like a separate legal distinction. So for example, we were Generate Capital Incorporated. We are now Generate Capital PBC. And in a sense, it kind of ties our corporate mandate and purpose directly to be that of the public benefit. And I think from like a kind of technical perspective, or at least from how we thought about it, it didn't require like a radical change in how we generally do business. So it was kind of like, we have an ability to do this. We fit within that framework. And it's something that we wanted to lead on.
Interesting. Okay.
Jessie, if you want to add to that.
No, I was just going to observe that it was interesting how little we really had to change, because so much of our work is centered around a mission already that it is aligned with the public benefit interest. So it's more of a confirmation and continuation of Generate's purpose for existing that is now codified in our corporate organization.
Very interesting. Learn something new every day. Well, thank you, ladies, so much for your time. I really, really enjoyed speaking with you all, and I hope that whoever is listening find it as informative as I did.
Catherine, can I make one shameless plug at the close?
Sure.
Great. Jessie knows this, and a lot of folks who might follow me on various platforms probably know this because I haven't been able to shut up about it. But I've launched a group called Women in Climate Investing in Finance, and it's meant to be a networking organization for, shocker, women who are interested in climate investing in finance.
Wow.
And we are trying to put together events currently mostly in San Francisco and New York, but we'll likely want to do an event in DC and other areas where there happen to be a lot of women working in the field. But wanted to make a plug for that because we're trying to spread the word and really just grow the network over the next year. So if folks are interested, please reach out to me on any platform, LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever works. Would love to get more women involved. And the thought is that this is frankly meant to be not just for women who are currently working in finance and investing, but those who aspire to, even if you're mid-career, even if you don't think you have a background to do this, if this is something that you're interested in, we certainly need you for the effort. So would be happy to include.
Can vouch. Great organization.
I would love for you to bring it to DC.
Great.
Any excuse to get out of the house.
Yes.
See people.
That's why this is so fun. Any chance to just see and catch up with folks. I love it.
Oh, all right, cool.
Yeah.